Hey guys, I'm Sarah from Who I Am Among the Pages, and if you're new here, thanks for stopping by, and if you're not, thanks for sticking around. So, for today's book rant, we are talking about Bone Crier's Moon by Catherine Purdy. So, I read this over the course of about 2 weeks or so. I wasn't real consistent with reading it. Usually I try anymore to read around 100 pages a day, but I was in the process of moving. It was final week at school, and it just didn't happen. So if you see me looking down, I'm just reading off some notes that I'm gonna get closer here real quick. Don't mind me. So to begin with, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. It was really interesting. It had a super unique magic system that I don't think I've ever seen in another YA fantasy novel, especially not a romance heavy one. I feel like romance heavy fantasy novels tend to not have the complexity that a fantasy focused fantasy novel does, if that makes sense. But this managed to have an incredibly unique magic system, along with being very romantic, very swoony. But I did give it 4 out of 5 stars because although it was really enjoyable, there are some flaws with it. So to get into the summary, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, so I would recommend clicking out now. Catch you on the flip side. This book follows a group of essentially witches called the Bone Criers. They're the farriers of the dead, and to do that, they have to have special powers. To get their powers, they actually go through... I've got an eyelash in my eye and it hurts so bad. They go and kill animals and take their bones. They cut themselves and kind of bond themselves to the bone, and each animal bone that they collect gives them a special power. So each one, for example, has to have a bird bone somewhere on their necklaces or on their armor that they wear with the bones on it, because the bird bone gives them the ability to see the dead that they need to ferry. After they've collected 3 grace bones, that's what they're called, they then go and have to do a rite of passage. Their rite of passage is to kill their soulmate. They play this song, they're a siren. Their soulmate shows up and they murder them, and then they have to bury them. That's how their gods, acknowledge that they've done all they need to do in order to be a farrier of the dead, to be a bone crier, or a, what was the term? Luris. A luris is what they call themselves. Bone crier is kind of the colloquial term, like the village lore about these. So in this book, we follow 3 different perspectives. One is a bone crier about to get her last grace bone and complete her rite of passage. A second bone crier that is the best friend of the first, Elise. We're following Sabine as the other bone crier, and she's her best friend. She doesn't like killing, though. She doesn't like blood. She doesn't like any of it, and she doesn't think she really wants to be a farrier. The last perspective we follow then is a Bastion, who is a victim of the Bone Criers, essentially. He saw his father be murdered by one of them, so he is on a quest to get revenge. And it just so happens that when Elise goes to do her rite of passage, Bastion is the one that shows up because he is on his hunt for revenge. He kidnaps her, and we see this really cool action adventure kind of between the Lurises, Bone Criers, and people, because they've kidnapped her away, and then the Bone Criers want her back, obviously. And there's also this flute that there's only one flute that can play the song that summons the dead to get them across the bridge to the underworld, and another character in this book has the flute and won't give it back. So we also see what happens when the dead get loose, and it's really interesting. It's very complex, and I'm already 4 minutes in, so I'm not going to get too much more into it. But this is a really interesting magic system and a very interesting plot. So before I go any farther, I want to talk, as usual, about the 5 things that I did like about it. So the first one, like I said, we already talked about, it was a really unique magic system. The magic is derived from grace bones of animals. So each character in this book has a different combination, each of the Bone Criers has a different combination of grace bones. So, somebody might be super graceful, somebody might have the strength of like a bear. It's really, really interesting, and it really, my cat's trying to get in my dresser. And it really promotes this really cool like team atmosphere because everybody has a different strength. So second was it has a really cool mood to the book, like a cool vibes. It definitely, as you're reading this, the cover is done in this really pretty palette of like slate blues and grays. The ring light's kind of shining. I don't know how to get that to stop. Really cool blues and grays, and I think that's like the vibe that you get from the book. Most of it takes place at night, so it's very moonlit and very spooky, but not scary, just ethereal, if you will. Kind of ghostly. That's sort of the I'm sorry. That's kind of how I imagine the scenery to be. Everything is very moonlit and silvery and that sort of thing. So the third thing I liked was there are some really strong female characters in here. Elise, the bone crier that's kidnapped, the one who really fails her rite of passage, is a really, really cool character. I mean, at first she's super, super ambitious, doesn't really care what it takes. She's going to be bone crier, and she's also the heir to the throne of the Luris. And she's all set up for that. She wants to do it. And then we see, sudden circumstances come up, and we see how she adapts to them. And she never gives up. She learns to like lean on people, that sort of thing. But we don't see her crumble at any point. And Sabine, she's a very dynamic character. We see her go from afraid to kill things, and when she got her first grace bone, she starts the book with only one grace bone. Elise is the one that had to like skin it and get the bone and do that because Sabine just couldn't do it. I think it mentions that she like threw up. So we see Sabine go from that to getting all of her grace bones, including hunting a sacred animal for her last one, the golden jackal, in an attempt to get the bone to make another of their flutes, of the sacred flute, so they can go back to ferrying the dead, so no more get loose. And we see her willing to kill in the name of getting Elise back. And of course that is nothing that she would have even considered at the beginning of the story. That's really the reason why Elise was kidnapped in the first place, because if Sabine had the stomach and the will to hurt somebody in the first place, then probably Elise would never have been kidnapped. Bastion also, we see him go from a very, very hateful, very vengeful, just biased, kind of ignorant character to somebody that sees another culture for all intents and purposes and doesn't agree with it. I mean, he still thinks it's awful that they have to sacrifice these men basically, but he sees why they have to do it and kind of accepts it. So I think that is kind of an allusion to how people in the real world can act. You have a very set opinion, but then you see the other side of it and you kind of go with it. I think that was a very clever way to include a character like that. On top of that, there are some wonderful female friendships in here. I don't think I've ever read a book that included a cast of all female characters. The only males in this book are Bastion, his one friend Marcel, and then the evil dead people. Some of them are male, that are attacking Sabine and Elise in the group. So, in the, I don't want to say clan, but like in the, all the Luris live in this abandoned castle. So in their famille is what it's called, famille. They're all female, and each have, a different relationship to one another. There's some like mother-daughter relationships because some of them are the children of other women. But they're all women, so you see the complexity and the differences between how some women act towards one another and the same woman might act towards another woman. And it really does a good job at exploring specifically female relationships because we just don't have a lot of male characters. And Sabine and Elise had a very, very heartfelt, very deep, and, strong friendship between one another. I mean, Sabine was basically watching Elise do her rite of passage and was watching out for her. So you wouldn't pick anybody that didn't mean a ton to you to go do something like that. And again, I think it's the first book where I've really seen something like that, where they had a friendship that was untouched by romance and men. So the fifth thing I did like about it was the complexity of the relationships in the book. So we see Adiva Elise's mother pick, you know, the familial of the bone criers and the overall well-being of the group over her own kid, because in her eyes, Elise was never enough. Like, she did everything she was supposed to, but she was kind of a suck up. She kind of did this, she kind of did that. She's not a loving mother, but Elise still wants her and wants to be loved by her. And that kind of longing, I don't think is very well captured in YA fiction usually. So to see the kind of longing from a child to want to be loved, I'll do what it takes, and then the mom being like, no, you're just not good enough, sorry. I don't think I've seen that quite so eloquently illustrated before in YA fiction, because it's not explicitly said. We're just shown that through their interactions and how especially Elise reacted to Adiva's actions. And I think that was really, really well done. So of course, though, there are at least five things that I didn't like about it. That's why it didn't get 5 stars on Goodreads for me. So the first thing was that the plot was very redundant. There was so much of, oh, well, Elise is here, let's take her and let's run over here. Well, now we can't stay here because there's no moonlight, and the Lyris get part of their, the ability to use the magic that they have from moonlight. Oh, well, there's no moonlight, so we've got to run here. But, oh, wait, we knew these people were going to be here, so we've got to run here. It's a lot of running from place to place, and there's a large portion in the middle where nothing happens with Elise and Bastion. You know, there's romance budding, but physically not a lot happens. Like, we see Sabine growing and fighting, but we don't see much from Elise and Bastion, and that's 2 of the perspectives. So that got a little bit old. And the second one kind of builds on that. It was a very predictable plot. I just, you know, I kind of saw where, you know, Adiva mentioned, well, I didn't have to, just because he was my soulmate, I didn't have to love him. And so I was like, well, then, like, I'm sure when she's making these sacrifices, like, it had to have something to do with another man. I don't know. Like, I kind of saw that coming, and then in the end when she threw herself into the gates of hell, I kind of saw that coming because she'd gone this far for this man that we never know of. So that kind of figured. There was just a lot in this book, and like when we find out that Bastion isn't Elise's soulmate, I don't know. I kind of like, I don't think that was very much hinted at in this book. Any, you know, foreshadowed, but I had a feeling that there was gonna be some kind of twist like that. I was like, this is too straightforward. Yeah, I don't know. Like, it wasn't as twisty and turny as it could have been, and like I feel like the twists and turns, that's my next point. The unnecessary plot turns in this, like, I don't think we could have gone the whole story, and like it really wasn't necessary to find out that Sabine was, you know, Adiva's daughter, you know, from her true love, you know, not her soulmate that she had to kill, but her true love, you know. So her and Elise are sisters. I thought that was unnecessary, and this turn of Elise's true soulmate being a prince, I think, is unnecessary. There's just a lot of little turns in this book that I don't think really added a whole lot. Like, Sabine killed the golden jackal and, you know, got her grace bone from that. Well, I was thinking because this is a sacred animal and it was sent by the gods and everything, that it was going to give her, like, superpowers, basically. So much better than any of the other Lyris has had. And it didn't. She just could hear like a dog and, you know, moved fast. Well, she could have just killed a wolf for that. Like, I thought since it was a sacred animal that it was going to be like, she was going to be like a wizard or something, and it wasn't. So I was like, well, there was no point in hyping that up so much then. And it seems kind of ridiculous that you'd have, you know, the flute that's played to Ferry the Dead can only come from one animal. So obviously the animal's very special. Well, why is the rest of the animal not special then? So I felt like that part of the magic system was a little bit flawed. So that, number 4 for me is, I thought the relationship between Sabine and Elise was a good friendship, but there were parts about that I didn't like. I thought it was kind of creepy. So we find out that they're sisters at the end. Well, I remember saying that in my reading vlog that I thought it would have been stronger in some ways if rather than a friendship, Sabine and Elise had a sapphic romance. Because it seems like it's building up to that. Like, you know, they're kind of, especially Sabine is like a little bit obsessed with Elise and so on and so forth. It just seemed like that's what it was building up to, and then we're finding out they're sisters. So there was no need for that build up because, you know, it seems like the friend, they were, you know, sisters before they realized, they knew that they were by blood. So the kind of romantic build up was just ew for me. Sorry. I don't know, it just didn't make a whole lot of sense to build up their relationship of what they thought of each other that way if we're going to find out that they're family. Because then that just adds, I don't know, I don't like that. So number 5 was just, and this is so petty, but just the French. This book is, like, I think it says in the back, like, Bone Crier's Moon is her love letter to France, where she spent a summer when she was 19 and the 3 French girls who helped her through her own rite of passage. It's fine for her to be inspired by France, but there's some of the terms and stuff that I feel like would have been stronger if they were just in a fantasy language rather than trying to root back to a language that we know. Because, you know, the world is called, I think you say it Gaul. It's Galle. Well, I know at least, I don't think it was ancient history. I don't remember if it was world history. I think it was my Latin class. The area that is now France was called Gaul, Gaul. I can't remember for the life of me what class that was in that we learned that. So this is obviously supposed to be France, and they're speaking kind of what I think is French. But this obviously isn't, I don't think, is the real world in any way. It's a fantasy world. So I don't know. I think it kind of weakens the world building if you're trying to use elements of a very specific language that isn't the book, that isn't what the book is written in, because obviously, like, we can't write a Star Trek novel in Klingon. Like, they're speaking English, but I don't know. If you're going to include terms that are in a different language, I think it should be a straight fantasy language, not trying to draw back to one of our romantic languages. That's just my opinion. Because, I mean, and again, I don't speak French. So if some of it was in French, there are things that went over my head. So yeah, overall I did enjoy it. It was a very entertaining read. And I would recommend this for fans of Sarah J. Maas, especially the Throne of Glass series, because there are elements of this that did remind me a lot of that, when it comes to soulmates and hidden identities and who's really who. Not going to get into why in case you haven't read Throne of Glass. I'm not going to spoil that for you. So I'd recommend it for fans of Throne of Glass. If you've read the Raven Cycle series by Maggie Stiefvater, I would recommend this book for fans of that, because the Raven Cycle series focuses on friendship between 4 boys, and this book really has at the heart of it friendship between different women. So between the 2 different sexes, and this one just focuses on women. And it does have some of like the same like creepy vibes that I think the Raven Cycle series has. And lastly, the Folk of the Air series. I do think that the powers that the Bone Criers have is kind of similar to something that we would see in, I cannot remember what that place is called for the life of me, but that we would see in especially the Cruel Prince. It reminded me a lot of some of the fairies in there. So yeah, that is my take on Bone Crier's Moon by Catherine Purdy. If you want, my Goodreads will be linked down below in case you are curious about what I'm reading, and my Wattpad will also be linked down below in case you want to keep up with what I'm writing. It has not been updated in a while, I will warn you. I am working on several projects, and at the beginning of the year I have a new schedule that is much more realistic than some of the others I've come up with, and I do think even with school I will be able to keep this schedule. So yeah, other than that, that pretty much wraps up this video, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace!